Speed. Mark. 8, Boise, Idaho, take 2. And action.
Hi, I'm Isaac Thornton. I directed Hester's Haunt and I co-founded Digno Films.
Hi, I'm Danny Taylor. I play as Gamaliel Whittaker in Hester's Haunt and I also co-founded Digno Films.
We wanted to make a small featurette to give you an insight into how we made the film and hopefully to inspire you guys to make your own film too.
We hope you enjoy it.
The first time I heard of Hester's Haunt was almost 2 years ago at my grandma's house.
It started with a magic trick. Isaac showed me some magic tricks at his grandmother's house, which led to seeing some of his family videos he'd made doing short films about detective stories. I had the idea for All Hallows of finding a new media whereby we could bring history to life, preferably through younger people rather than the existing church community. So the idea of Hester's Haunt started off as just a very short clip saying that we had a ghost to the film that you've seen today.
The suggestion was before Digno Films was even a thing, and initially I didn't think much of the idea because I'd only made small scale short films with my cousins, and the idea of suddenly having a film set in the 1600s with a large cast, it just seems near impossible. It was around 6 months after the original chat with Georgina that I came back to the idea and thought, this is a good opportunity and we should do something with it. And by this point, we'd formed Digno Films, so I had a team of people who I knew could make this possible. I went back to Georgina and said, we've got a team and we want to make this project. And by this point, she'd managed to compile this original historical source from Neil Burnett, and it kind of outlined the entire timeline leading up to Hester's death, and that really helped when it got to script writing. The first thing I did when we decided we wanted to make this project was I drafted up the title card that you see and on the poster the Hester's Haunt logo, and I sketched it in a notebook over a year ago now, and then later refined it on PowerPoint. But it was that initial sketch that kind of made me realise, I want this to be on a film and I want to make this. And the script itself went through lots of drafts. I remember early on I decided that I wanted it to end on the caretaker, I wanted it to be the caretaker telling modern children who would learn the tale along with the audience, and I wanted it to end on him. Another thing I decided early on was that I wanted half the characters to be modern kids and half the characters to be from the 1600s. That not only helped, again, with conveying the plot, but also it kept it close to one of the only things the church had asked of us, and that was to keep it for young people. So one thing you'll notice is most of the on-set crew were under 18, young people, and this film is really being made for young people to kind of give them an insight into local history. The first draft was very similar to the final shooting script, just with a few changes at the start, but it was really after that first draft that Georgina gave us the green light and we began casting. Casting Danny as a lead role was a no-brainer. He'd been my friend forever, and we'd started Digno Films together. And I'd seen him act from everything from a super serious, true-to-life performance in some of our prior shorts to big, larger-than-life musical characters in things like The Addams Family. So, I knew he could do it. His range is insane. I had so much faith that Danny could portray Gamaliel that even while writing this script, I had it in mind that, Gamaliel would be played by Danny.
So me and Isaac, in between other projects we do within Digno Films, would often talk about Hester's Haunt and what we kind of envisioned it to be. Obviously not the scale it is now with the locations we've got and the people involved, because that is just crazy and not what we'd ever dreamed of at that moment. But when he was writing the script, Isaac, he he obviously casted me as Gamaliel, but then this character of Richard, and I was reading through what he'd written, and I kind of thought, I just see my friend Ben playing this character. Obviously, I've worked with Ben a lot through shows and bits of film, and it just feel like he fit the character perfectly when I was reading it.
I'd never really seen George act until we did a test shoot of an Inspector Calls earlier in the year. And when we did that, it kind of dawned on me that she is really good. So I had no doubt that she could easily take up the role of the titular character. I'd been friends with Ollie and Eloise for a long time, and I'd seen them both act before. Ollie has major credits with Apple TV, and I've seen Eloise in a number of stage plays, and they're both phenomenal. And they also work really well together on screen. So when writing, even, we had these two school kids, and I just knew, like, these are the two I want to bring these guys to life.
So we now had a full cast except the groundkeeper, which proved difficult to find. But this is where Vinny came in. He was first recommended to us by one of our actresses. So we got in contact with him and sent him a bit of the script, and he sent us a tape of himself reading the lines. And he was just perfect. Like, you just kind of got that creepy, eerie feel about it, and it was just great. So we just automatically told him, you've got the part.
We now had a full cast, and it was around last December that we first met for a proper read-through of the finished script. And it was around the same time that we began working on the costumes.
Hi, I'm Jane Turner-Brown. I designed the costumes for Hester's Haunt. So once the script for the film was finalised, it was obvious that what the film would need would be someone to take on the design and the making of costumes. I was more than happy to do that. I've done a lot of handicrafts and things over the years. None of the costumes were difficult to sew, but they had to be made from materials that were readily available and that were not expensive. They had to give the look of the period. So, for instance, with the Roundhead soldiers, we used some dust sheets that a decorator had left behind, but we went for sashes and neckerchiefs in the Roundhead colour, which was a tawny, which is sort of a burnt orange colour. And actually they looked really striking on the film. I was quite pleased with how they turned out. The Cavalier outfits had to have the crimson red, so both Gamaliel and Richard, his sidekick, had crimson red in their outfits because that was the colour of the Cavaliers. The design ethic was to suggest the period. The villagers' costumes were made from Hessian sacking that a builder who'd been doing work in my garden had left behind, and Hester's outfit was made from some old curtains, the ghost outfits from some old tablecloth.
By January, pretty much all the costumes were done, the cast was ready, the script was finalised, and we were pretty much ready to go. The only thing that we had left to figure out was how on earth we were going to shoot this thing. Because the entire film and everything you see in Hester's Haunt is shot on iPhone. And don't get me wrong, iPhones have fantastic cameras nowadays. However, you don't get the same level of control as with a proper cinema camera. So early on, that was something we knew we kind of had to work around, was the limitations of shooting on a phone. But I think in the end it turned out really well.
Camera's rolling, sound speed.
Speed.
Mark it.
6 Alpha, take 19, mark.
The first day of filming was all the way back in January, and it was that insert of Gamaliel drinking in the tavern with all the villagers around him. And even though it's only a few second clip, it still took a lot of planning.
So from getting all the extras into costume to then finding where to hide the boom mic but still getting good audio, it turned out to be a really long process.
I think the shoot took around 3 or 4 hours, including sorting out costumes, sound, lighting, everything. We'd been to the location before to kind of block out where we thought Gamaliel should be, but this was the first time we'd seen it populated with extras and everything, and it still took a lot of changing around of people and making sure everyone could be seen, the sound was okay and all this. But in the end, I'm really happy with the final result.
So the first day was really hard, and that was just with one setup of a shot. But it was the next few days which really tested us with shooting.
Camera's rolling, sound speed.
That's me.
Action.
The next day we filmed was exactly a month later in February, and it's all the exterior church scenes you see.
So we get on set around 9 AM, but then you don't really start till around 12 filming because you've got to get everyone in costume, you've got to put all your kit together, wait for people to get there if there's any problems. So it does turn out to be quite a long day of waiting around, but then when you're filming it does usually go really fast.
This was the first day we had the school kids and the caretaker on set, so how they looked on that day was how they'd look for the rest of the film. We were filming over multiple days in multiple locations, but in the end it's condensed down to 10 minutes. So how you see them on the first shoot day is how they'd have to look for the rest of the film. I think people often don't realise quite how much work goes into making something like this, because it's not just what you see on the film that we have to do. You know, it's not just turning up and shooting. There's days and weeks of planning ahead of time, and you know, if we didn't have all the support from everyone at the church and, you know, all our friends and family who were willing to give up their time, this could not have been possible. A lot of filmmaking is planning. You know, we had to figure out how to get cast from Halifax all the way up to Kirkburton in time for shooting at 9 o'clock in the morning. There was so many variables that you have to keep track of.
Mark.
Scene 5, Dragon, take 5, Mark.
And action.
The third shoot day was everything inside of the church, and that's when we had all the extras in. We had Gamaliel in costume, Richard, plus the school kids and the caretaker. I think this was the day we had the most characters in one scene at once.
So the next shoot day was the first time I really got to play with the character, because in the pub it was short, it was just an insert cut. So this is where I really got to feel like Gamaliel and this drunkard kind of who landed himself into this big role within the church. So it was difficult, but I think I played it off quite well eventually. Seeing kind of the church fill up with all these extras and crew and different people, it was definitely nerve-wracking at first, because at this point I only saw the church as this big empty echoey room, and all of a sudden there was so much going on and just like filling the scene up. And it was definitely better for me eventually, because you kind of feel the role more, like these are my people, these are Gamaliel's people, and this is who looked up to him really. A funny story about that day as well was we've been there since 9, everyone had been there since 9. We were all tired, we were all very hungry, which is the main point, and there was no time to get out of costume, so there was flocks of these 1600s people walking down the street towards the co-op, and the looks that we got were the funniest things ever, and they'll always stick with me. And then we went in there, it was very odd, from like little villagers in potato sacks to Hester in a weird costume of a ghost.
A big part of filming in the church, which was set in 1644, was trying to keep everything authentic, and a lot of modern stuff we could cover up in camera using rags and stuff, but there was some bigger things such as the speakers, which we had to take out in post.
So once we'd finished filming in Kirkburton, next was to film at the vicarage. We couldn't use the original vicarage that Gamaliel and Hester would have originally lived in due to Hester's kind of area being knocked down. So we were lucky enough to use Woodsome Hall Golf Club, which turned out to be amazing. It just looks great.
Being able to shoot in an actual building from the 1600s helped massively. Not only was it authentic, so we didn't have to do quite as much work covering things up, but I think it also helped the cast, you know, who had read the script and they knew it was set in the 1600s, but once we actually got in the room, which had, you know, genuine artefacts from the time just sat there, I think that really helped. The first day at Woodsome, we were shooting the soldiers as they went up to kill Hester, and we'd originally had other people who were meant to play the soldiers, but unfortunately they dropped out about a week before we filmed. So we had to very quickly contact Will and Elijah, who luckily pulled through, and you know, they managed to come for costume fittings, do all of this in an insanely quickly amount of time. And I'm so glad that they did, because they kind of steal the show, I think. You know, they're stern and they look almost lifeless and robotic, like a soldier in this time would. You know, they came with a goal, and that was to take a life, and I think they really reflect that. There's a shot after Hester's been killed, of them, you know, reholstering the gun and everything. And I remember I just said to them, "You've just killed someone, and now I want to know how that's going through your head." And then we just started rolling, and that's what came out, and I think it plays off perfectly. The second day at Woodsum was shooting that night scene just before the soldiers, where Richard comes in and he's telling Gamaliel that we'll need to leave and all this. And I think that might have been one of the easier days, purely because we were working in a confined space and we could control everything. You know, working outside, filming all the exterior shots, you're really working against time. You know, when you want to do a morning scene, you have to be in the morning with the morning lighting, night scene, nighttime. When you're inside, you have more control over everything. And in fact, we actually shot that night scene in the middle of the day. We just blacked out the curtains and lit it with a small key light set to a fire filter. And then we kind of cleaned it up a bit in post. But I think shooting in the vicarage in Woodsum was definitely a lot easier because you had a lot more control.
In the indoor scenes at Woodsum, you only ever see around 3 people actually there. But in reality, there was about 15 people in the room at the time, with crew and just different people helping out. Luckily, the staff at Woodsum Hall were nice enough to let us move furniture around and accommodated our gear coming in and all sorts. So it was great. I mean, it was difficult for us moving all these tables and things, but it definitely worked.
The third and final day at Woodsum was when Gamaliel received a letter dismissing him from his position. And even though it's only a small scene, it's probably one of the most important in the whole film because it sets off the events that lead to Hester's death.
So this is where we meet Hester, and the driving force and anger between everything going on in the whole storyline. We knew we had to make this bit good.
The scene is quite emotional. Hester's clearly very upset with Gamaliel and everything, so he kind of had to let Georgia, who played Hester, come to do that scene in her own time. We had run rehearsals the week before to block it out and kind of allow the cast to understand the severity of the scene, but it wasn't until that day on set where, you know, I basically said to George, you know, Hester's upset, and she just started crying. Yeah, and I don't get how she did it, but I said Hester's upset, tears started coming, and it was incredible. The last big shoot day we had was when we filmed all the kids coming out of school, and we managed to film that at Kirkburton Middle School. They were kind enough to let us film there on the weekend, and it was really fun. You know, we had a load of our friends in school uniform. Danny kind of blocked them out, and you know, he said, "You guys play football." You know, this. We had sound crew there to do a wild track, and you know, it ran really smoothly. You know, and it was just a load of fun. The editing process for Hester's Haunt was kind of unique, I think, because we filmed it over a long period of time, from February all the way to like the middle of summer. So we kind of had an edit of the film going at all times. Like when we were shooting at Woodsum, we had an edit of the start of the film and then the end of the film. You know, we kind of filled in the gaps as we went along. The whole time while I was editing the film, I was showing it to people like Danny and my parents and whoever wanted to give advice. And, you know, if it wasn't for them, I don't think it'd be anywhere near as good as it is today, because, you know, they were really the people who kind of said, what if we did this? What if we tried this? And it kind of, you know, you can film all the footage and have it perfectly, but unless it's edited together right, it's never going to look good.
So I've been on every shoot day of this production, which was amazing, but you don't really see it come together until the edit, as when you're filming, you don't know exactly what's going on all the time, because it's not in order, and it's not until that rough cut, which is amazing to see, because it's like this story has definitely come to life.
Once we'd wrapped filming, we had a pretty much full cut of the entire film you could watch from start to end and get the story, but something was missing, and that was the music. And that's where Michael Lasseter came in.
Hi, I'm Michael Lasseter, and I did the music for Hester's Haunt. When making the music, for me, it's really about really opening up and listening and watching and looking at what's there in the film, what's the tone. And this is was very traditional, was very folklore. So it was pretty easy to really figure out what kind of instruments we needed, and obviously there's no guitar and there's no wanging along. So it's we've kind of just stuck to the bare bones of the times. There's strings, of course, the violas. We did use some older, like we used an old flute, and we did use some mandolin a little bit. But for the most part, we've stuck to real, small orchestra sounds. And picking an organ was interesting because we didn't want some big pipe organ, because we had an older cathedral, and it was pretty obvious what to use, really. And so that's what we went with. This project was different than a lot of other projects I've worked on. I've done a lot of commercials for product, like for air conditioners and just different kinds of product that people would make TV commercials out of. In America, I did that. And I've done some short film, but more kind of ad-oriented things, more things that were trying to put over something. And this was more of a story, more of an adventure, if you will, and had actors and people to kind of look at and vibe from. So this was pretty different than a lot of the stuff I've ever done, and I really enjoyed it.
So working with Michael was just fantastic. This is the first time me and Isaac have ever been able to do something like this, and we're so thankful for him. But he's definitely the brains behind the music. Me and Isaac would input our ideas and what we want the sound to be like, but he'd blend it all together, he'd do his own work without us there, and it was just great.
Once the music was put in and everything was adjusted and everything was right, and pretty much the version of film you've seen today, we ran it through some test audiences, and they gave some good feedback, like the ending with the ghost was originally a lot shorter, and pretty much universally the feedback was we want more ghosts, so we kind of extended that out a bit. But it was a very big relief to kind of show it to people early and then come back and say we liked it and that what you've made was worth making. There are 7 names on the poster of Hester's Haunt. There's me as a director, and then there's the main cast. But I think it's really important to realise that there's so many people behind the scenes that this film would not be possible without. From costume to runners to sound to everyone who gave up time to help us make this and give you guys the film that you've seen today. And I think it's really important to just take a moment to just appreciate everyone who's helped us out.